The story is told of a man who simply would not work. He wanted to be taken care of in every need. To his way of thinking, the church or the government or both owed him a living because he had paid his taxes and his tithing. He had nothing to eat, but refused to work or care for himself. Out of desperation and disgust, those who had tried to help him decided that since he would not lift a finger to sustain himself, they might as well just take him to the cemetery and let him pass on. On the way to the cemetery, one man said, "We can't do this. I have some corn I'll give him." So they explained this to the man, and he said, "Have the husks been removed?" They responded, "No." "Well then," he said, "drive on."
Before this conference weekend, some asked me if I would speak in German. And I said no, but it may sound like it. The church is a home for all to come together, regardless of the depth or the height of our testimony. I know of no sign on the doors of our meeting houses that says, "Your testimony must be this tall to enter."
At a stake conference in the Midwest about 10 years ago, I met a sister who told me that her non-member husband had been accompanying her to church for 12 years, but had never joined the church. What should she do, she asked. I counseled her to keep doing all the right things and to be patient and kind with her husband. About a month later, she wrote me as follows, quote, "Well, I thought that the 12 years was a good show of patience, but I didn't know if I was being very kind about it. So I practiced real hard for over a month, and he got baptized."
I remember my mother, aged 90 or so, cooking in her condominium kitchen and then exiting with a tray of food. I asked her where she was going. She replied, "Oh, I'm taking some food to the elderly." I thought to myself, "Mother, you are the elderly." I can never express enough gratitude for my parents, who are my prime gospel teachers.
An acquaintance of mine used to live in a ward with some of the highest statistics in the church. Attendance was high. Home teaching numbers were high. Primary children were always well behaved. Ward dinners included fantastic food that members rarely spilled on the meeting house floor. And I think there were never any arguments at church ball.
As the meeting began, the representative from the Federal Disaster Agency stood in a very powerful way and began to say with a voice of authority what needed to be done. After listing each of the 5 or 6 tasks he said were essential, the stake president responded quietly after each one, "We've already done that." After a few minutes, the man from the Federal Disaster Agency said, "I think that I would just sit down and watch for a while." He and his deputies then listened as bishops and elders quorum presidents reported what they had done. They described what direction they had received and followed from their leaders. They talked.
As a young 12-year-old scout, I received a gift of a much-desired addition to my scouting equipment. It was a hatchet with a heavy leather cover. On the next overnight hike, we arrived in camp after dark, wet and cold from the heavy snow on the trail. All I could think about was building a big, roaring fire. I immediately went to work chopping a fallen tree with my new hatchet. As I chopped, I was frustrated because it didn't seem to be cutting very well. In my frustration, I worked harder. Disappointed, I returned to camp with only a few pieces of wood. By the light of someone else's fire, I discovered the problem. I hadn't taken the cover off the hatchet. I can report, however, that the cover was chopped to shreds. The lesson: I became distracted with other things.
One evening, Susan and I stood near a window in our home and watched two of our little boys playing outside. During the course of their adventures, the younger of the two boys was injured slightly in a small accident. We quickly recognized that he was not seriously hurt, and we decided not to provide immediate assistance. We wanted to observe and see if any of our family discussions about brotherly kindness had sunk in. What happened next was both interesting and instructive. The older brother consoled and carefully helped the younger brother back into the house. By this time, Susan and I had positioned ourselves near the kitchen so we could see what next took place. And we were prepared to intervene immediately if additional bodily harm seemed likely, or if a serious additional accident was imminent. The older brother dragged a chair to the kitchen sink. He climbed up on the chair, assisted his brother onto the chair, turned on the water, and proceeded to pour a very large quantity of dishwashing soap onto the scratched arm of his little brother. He did his best to gently wash away the dirt. The reaction of the little brother to this procedure can only be described accurately using language from the Holy Scriptures. And they shall have cause to howl, and weep and wail and gnash their teeth. And oh, brothers and sisters, did that little boy howl. After the scrubbing was finished, the arm was carefully dried with a towel. Eventually, the screaming stopped. The older brother next climbed up onto the kitchen counter, opened a cabinet, and found a new tube of medicated ointment. Though the scratches on his little brother were not large or extensive, the older brother applied almost all of the ointment in the tube to the entire injured arm. The screaming did not resume, as the little brother clearly liked the soothing effect of the ointment much more than he appreciated the cleansing effect of the dishwashing soap.